The arrogant CEO Claire Bennett had built her reputation on fire, steel, and the art of control. In the heart of Manhattan's corporate jungle, she stood as the unchallenged empress of Bennett Industries, a company worth billions. A fortress of glass and steel that mirrored her own personality, polished, cold, and untouchable. At just 38, she had climbed from ambitious analyst to one of the most feared CEOs in the world, not by chance but by the relentless pursuit of dominance. To her, kindness was weakness, hesitation was failure, and anyone who slowed down was meant to be left behind. Claire liked to tell herself she was not cruel, simply efficient, but those who had worked under her knew otherwise. She cut through people the way a hot knife slid through butter, smiling only when victory was secure, laughing only when an opponent had been crushed. It was this hunger that had brought her to the edge of her greatest triumph yet, a billion-dollar partnership with Sakura Technologies of Tokyo. The deal, if successful, would put Bennett Industries among the most powerful conglomerates on Earth. Failure was not in her vocabulary, or so she believed. That humid June morning began with her usual impatience. She waited in the lobby of her headquarters, her heels clicking against polished marble floors as she scrolled through her phone, firing off clipped emails to subordinates who scrambled to meet her demands. To Claire, the world was always 5 steps too slow, and if she did not apply pressure every second, it would collapse into mediocrity. The car was late. Not by much, not even by a minute, but in Claire's mind, 30 seconds was unacceptable. A delay of 30 seconds meant someone was not paying attention. Someone had forgotten that her time was more valuable than theirs, and such sloppiness did not deserve forgiveness. When the sleek black Mercedes finally pulled to the curb, Claire's eyes narrowed. The driver stepped out with a calm grace that seemed almost irritating to her, too composed, too unbothered by her sharp glare. He was tall, early 30s, his uniform neat despite the oppressive summer heat. His skin was dark, his expression neutral, and his voice when he opened the door was smooth and professional. "Good morning, Ms. Bennett," he said. Claire did not return the greeting. She slid into the car with barely a glance at him, already resuming her storm of emails. "Airport, step on it. I don't want to miss my flight," she ordered. Daniel Carter did not react. He closed the door gently, returned to the driver's seat, and merged into traffic with an efficiency born of experience. His hands were steady on the wheel, his eyes alert but calm. In the back seat, Claire spread out her documents, pages filled with financial projections, market strategies, and charts proving her plan was flawless. Her lips moved silently as she rehearsed key phrases of the pitch, words sharpened like blades to cut through hesitation in the Tokyo boardroom. She was preparing for war, and in her mind the Japanese executives were simply another battlefield to conquer. As they moved through Manhattan, Claire spoke into the air as if the driver were not even present. "You know what separates people like me from everyone else?" she asked, though her eyes never left her papers. "Most people settle. A steady paycheck, a small apartment, a predictable life. They go home at 5, watch television, and waste their potential. They never push themselves to be extraordinary." She gave a small laugh, one without warmth. "That's why they stay small. Me? I create billion-dollar deals. I build empires. That's what matters." Daniel's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror for a moment, his gaze steady but unreadable. "I suppose everyone has their own definition of extraordinary, ma'am," he replied softly. Claire finally looked up, arching an eyebrow. She studied him for the first time, as though realizing he was more than a moving uniform in front of her. "Driving a car isn't exactly changing the world, is it?" she said with a smile that was closer to a smirk. "No offense, of course. I'm sure you're very good at it." "None taken," Daniel said, his voice even. Claire leaned back, satisfied, and continued her monologue. "I'm about to close a deal that will generate jobs across continents and put my company at the top of the global supply chain. That's the kind of impact I'm talking about. That's what separates visionaries from the rest of the world." She tapped her manicured nails against the screen of her phone, scrolling through figures that only confirmed her own brilliance. "My team is good, but at the end of the day, this comes down to me. My vision. My ability to make them bend." Traffic slowed as they neared the tunnel, but Claire barely noticed, lost in her rehearsals. That was when Daniel's phone buzzed from the cup holder. He pressed his earpiece and answered, his voice suddenly shifting into a rhythm and tone that made Claire glance up. "Moshi Moshi," he said. And what followed was a stream of fluid Japanese so natural, so precise that Claire's head snapped up in shock. The syllables rolled from his tongue with effortless clarity. Not the hesitant cadence of a hobbyist, but the confidence of someone who belonged to the language. Claire's eyes widened, then narrowed again as she processed what she was hearing. For the first time that morning, her papers lay forgotten on the seat beside her. Daniel finished the conversation, offered a polite farewell in Japanese, and tapped the call off. Silence filled the car for a moment. Well, Claire said finally, leaning forward slightly. That was unexpected. Let me guess, you watch a lot of anime. Picked up some phrases from subtitles, huh? Cute hobby. She gave a sharp laugh and shook her head. People waste so much time with these little distractions. Daniel glanced at her in the mirror, his face calm, his tone steady. I studied Japanese for several years, ma'am. That was a colleague confirming some documents. Sure, Claire said dismissively, already flipping back to her papers. Impressive party trick, I suppose. I'm sure it works well on dates or with friends. But business? She smirked, returning her eyes to her screen. Leave that to the professionals. Daniel said nothing. His silence was not submissive but layered, like still water that hid unseen depths. Claire, too wrapped in her own confidence, did not notice. They reached the airport soon after. Daniel parked smoothly, retrieved her luggage with the same quiet efficiency, and wished her safe travels. Claire did not reply. She was already striding into the terminal, her thoughts focused on Tokyo, on power, on the belief that no obstacle could possibly stand in her way. But somewhere in the rhythm of Daniel's calm silence, in the memory of that flawless Japanese, an invisible thread had been tied. Claire could not see it yet, but the man she had dismissed as a driver would soon hold the key to everything she believed she controlled. Cracks in the empire. The flight to Tokyo was long, but Claire never once allowed herself to rest. While the cabin dimmed and other passengers pulled blankets over themselves, she remained upright in her seat with a glowing laptop balanced on her knees and a stack of papers spread across the tray table. Her fingers typed at a relentless pace, revising her pitch slides again and again, hunting for sharper phrasing, for stronger words that would hammer her point, until no one in the Japanese boardroom could resist. Sleep for Claire Bennett was wasted time. She prided herself on being a machine, always on, always focused, never soft. She glanced occasionally at the mirror-like window beside her, watching the night sky drift by, her own reflection glaring back with determination. Her mind replayed her driver's sudden shift into Japanese earlier that morning. Daniel Carter. She had barely remembered his name until she saw it printed on the airport valet ticket. The image of him speaking fluent Japanese tugged at her thoughts more than she cared to admit. She dismissed it, reminding herself that fluency in a foreign language did not equal business acumen. What mattered in her world was vision, strategy, and the ability to dominate a room. Still, some part of her mind had registered his calm confidence, and the fact that his Japanese had sounded so natural gnawed faintly at her. She buried it under spreadsheets and numbers until it was almost forgotten. By the time the jet touched down at Narita International Airport, Claire was already rehearsing her opening lines. The Tokyo skyline rose in the distance, a glittering expanse of steel and neon that spoke of order, tradition, and quiet resilience. She admired it, but in the way a general admires the terrain before battle. This was not a city to enjoy, it was a city to conquer. Her executive team had flown in ahead of her. At the hotel's top-floor suite, they gathered for a final strategy meeting. Marcus Green, her CFO, had been with the company the longest. He knew Claire well enough to sense when she was about to bulldoze through advice. He sat quietly as she spoke, but the worry lines etched across his forehead deepened with every sentence. Jennifer Walsh, head of international development, had the courage to raise her voice even when others didn't. The others, senior vice presidents hand-picked by Claire, rarely contradicted her in public, though their eyes often betrayed unspoken concerns. Let me be absolutely clear, Claire said, pacing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed Tokyo's glowing skyline. This deal is not optional. It is the key to our next decade of dominance. Sakura Technologies needs us, whether they realize it or not. We bring efficiency, global reach, and the scale they lack. When I walk into that boardroom tomorrow, I will show them why Bennett Industries is not just a partner but their only path forward. Marcus cleared his throat, his voice careful. Claire, with all respect, the numbers are strong, but culture matters here. We're dealing with an organization deeply rooted in Japanese traditions. They value harmony, consensus, and humility. Our research shows that a direct, aggressive pitch could be interpreted as disrespect. Claire stopped pacing and turned toward him. Her eyes were sharp, her arms crossed. Marcus, I've closed deals on 3 continents. I know how to read a room. At the end of the day, business is business. You put the right numbers in front of them, you prove your superiority, and they will say yes. It's universal. Jennifer spoke softly but with conviction. With respect, Claire, remember Singapore last year? We nearly lost that partnership because cultural nuances were ignored. It only worked out because we had a local consultant step in at the last second. If that hadn't happened, but it did happen, Claire cut in, her tone dismissive. And we won, because I knew when to push and when to hold. That's why I'm here. That's why Bennett Industries leads and everyone else follows. The room fell silent. The executives exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared continue. Claire's word was final, and challenging it further would only earn her cold, cutting remarks that could linger for weeks. She straightened her jacket and clicked her laptop closed. Enough, I want all supporting documentation finalized. Financial projections, legal frameworks, integration timelines, flawless. I will not walk into that boardroom with anything less than perfection. Dismissed, the team filed out. Marcus lingered behind, catching Jennifer near the door. He lowered his voice, but in the quiet of the suite, his words still carried. She doesn't see it, he muttered. Every time she bulldozes through cultural nuance, we barely scrape by. One of these days, it's going to cost us everything. Jennifer sighed, glancing back at Claire, who was gathering her notes with rigid precision. Maybe Tokyo will be different, she whispered. Maybe she'll surprise us. Or maybe, Marcus said grimly, Tokyo will surprise her. Meanwhile, in another part of the hotel, Daniel Carter sat in the modest driver's lounge reserved for contracted staff. His uniform jacket hung neatly on the back of a chair, his white shirt still pristine despite the long day. A Japanese business magazine lay open in his hands, the characters flowing smoothly beneath his gaze as he read with the comfort of fluency. Across the room, another driver, Tommy Williams, poured himself a coffee from the vending machine. He was in his 50s, a seasoned employee who had been with the company for years. Spotting Daniel, he walked over and sat across from him. Hey, Daniel. How was the morning run with Queen Ice? Tommy chuckled at the nickname many drivers had quietly given Claire Bennett. Daniel smiled faintly, closing the magazine just enough to be polite. Uneventful, he replied. That's what you always say, Tommy said with a shake of his head. Every time I've driven her, she's either barking orders into her phone or making speeches about how people without ambition are wasting oxygen. Last month, she told me I was basically furniture, just part of the scenery in her empire. Daniel's expression remained calm, though his eyes softened with something close to compassion. She's under a lot of pressure, he said evenly. Big deal coming up. People show their stress in different ways. That's generous, Tommy muttered. Most would call her what she is, arrogant, cold, and blind to the people around her. Daniel said nothing for a long moment. His fingers tapped lightly against the cover of the magazine, as though weighing thoughts he did not voice. Finally, he offered only this. Sometimes the people who seem hardest on the outside are the ones carrying the heaviest burdens. It doesn't excuse cruelty, but it explains it. Tommy frowned. Man, you're too patient for your own good. Daniel gave a quiet smile. Patience opens doors that arrogance keeps shut. The two men sat in silence for a while, the hum of vending machines filling the air. Daniel eventually reopened his magazine, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, absorbing insights about Japan's business climate that most executives would have overlooked. He was not simply a driver, not a background figure in someone else's empire. He was a man with layers, with knowledge, with skills invisible to those too blind or too arrogant to look closely. And as the city of Tokyo pulsed beyond the windows, the stage was quietly being set. Claire Bennett thought she was marching toward her inevitable victory. What she did not know was that the very man she dismissed daily might soon be the only one capable of saving everything she had built. The deal that fell apart, the morning of the meeting arrived with the kind of precision that Tokyo itself seemed to embody. The streets below the hotel moved like clockwork, trains arriving to the second, pedestrians flowing in an orderly rhythm, neon lights blinking against the glass towers. Claire Bennett stood before the mirror in her suite, fastening the final button of her charcoal blazer. Her reflection stared back at her with sharp determination. Hair perfectly styled, makeup immaculately applied, every detail calculated to project authority. Today, she would walk into a boardroom filled with some of the most powerful men in Japan, and she intended to leave that room with their signatures inked on her contract. Her team gathered in the lobby, carrying neatly prepared binders, tablets, and copies of projections. They looked ready, though tension pulled at the edges of their expressions. Marcus Green adjusted his tie repeatedly, Jennifer Walsh clutched her folder like a shield, and the other executives exchanged tight glances that betrayed their unease. Claire noticed none of it. Her mind was locked on the outcome, not the process. To her, doubt was wasted energy and caution was the enemy of victory. The convoy of black cars arrived, engines purring softly as the drivers stepped out. Daniel Carter was already waiting beside the lead car, his posture calm, his eyes watchful. He opened the rear door with his usual quiet precision. "Good morning, Ms. Bennett," he said simply. Claire gave him a curt nod and slid inside, followed by Marcus and Jennifer. The ride to Sakura Technologies headquarters cut through Tokyo's immaculate streets, passing shrines nestled between skyscrapers, the old and the new, woven seamlessly together. Claire did not notice. Her eyes were on her phone, scrolling through her slides one final time. Marcus, sitting across from her, cleared his throat. "Claire, before we go in, just one more time. I think we should reconsider the tone of the opening. Their executives may interpret an aggressive entry as, 'Marcus,'" Claire snapped without looking up. "I didn't build Bennett Industries by second-guessing myself. I don't need a cultural lesson. Numbers speak louder than polite phrases." Jennifer shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Daniel, in the driver's seat, caught the reflection of Marcus's frustrated expression in the mirror but kept his own gaze steady on the road. His silence was not born of fear but of wisdom. He knew when words would be wasted. The Sakura headquarters rose into view, a gleaming tower of glass with a minimalist aesthetic that spoke of both modernity and tradition. As they entered the lobby, the employees bowed respectfully, a gesture Claire barely acknowledged with a brisk nod. Her heels clicked across the polished floor as if she were marching into enemy territory. In the boardroom, the executives of Sakura Technologies awaited them. They sat in a neat row along one side of the long oak table, each in dark tailored suits, expressions polite but reserved. At the center was Chairman Takahiro Watanabe, a man in his 60s with silver hair and the quiet authority of someone who commanded respect without raising his voice. Beside him were senior board members, each carrying an air of measured dignity. Claire entered with her team behind her, her smile sharp, her handshake firm to the point of dominance. She launched directly into her presentation, projecting her slides onto the wall. Her voice carried the clipped precision of a courtroom prosecutor. "Gentlemen, Bennett Industries is here to transform your future. We bring unmatched efficiency, cutting-edge robotics integration, and access to markets across 3 continents. With us, Sakura Technologies will no longer be a regional player, but a global leader." The Japanese executives listened in silence, their hands folded, their faces unreadable. Claire interpreted their quiet as passive agreement, as deference to her authority. What she failed to see was the discomfort in their eyes, the stiffness of their postures, the subtle glances they exchanged. Her words were strong, but they carried an edge of arrogance, an assumption that she was the savior, and they the ones in need. When one of the board members, Mr. Nakamura, raised a question in careful English about long-term relationship structures, Claire brushed it aside with a brisk answer. "Our focus is growth and profit. Relationship is secondary. The numbers are what matter most." A shadow flickered across Nakamura's face, but he said nothing further. Jennifer shifted nervously in her seat, sensing the growing tension. She tried to catch Claire's eye, but Claire was too absorbed in her own performance. The more silence she encountered, the harder she pushed. Her voice grew sharper, her words more forceful. "This is the opportunity of a lifetime, gentlemen. With our partnership, you cannot lose. Without us, you will remain trapped in outdated systems, watching competitors pass you by." The room chilled. The polite smiles of the executives remained, but their eyes had hardened. Chairman Watanabe leaned back, folding his hands. He spoke in Japanese to his colleagues, his tone calm but cool. Claire caught none of it, mistaking the exchange for internal debate. She pressed harder, unaware she was digging her own grave. Then came the breaking point. A junior translator, nervous and hurried, mistranslated one of Claire's phrases. When she said, "We will reshape your company to fit our model," the translator's rendering suggested something closer to, "We will take control and bend you to our design." The effect was immediate. Several executives stiffened, their polite expressions cracking for the first time. Watanabe's eyes narrowed slightly, though his face remained composed. A ripple of unease passed through the boardroom. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Jennifer's heart sank. Claire, oblivious, kept pushing, mistaking their silence for hesitation instead of rejection. At last, Watanabe spoke in deliberate English. "Ms. Bennett, we appreciate your proposal, but Sakura Technologies values respect, harmony, and long-term vision. We do not respond well to force." His words were measured, but the meaning was clear. For the first time, Claire faltered. A flash of uncertainty crossed her face, quickly masked by a tight smile. She tried to recover, but the damage had been done. The air in the room was thick with quiet disapproval. The billion-dollar deal she had considered already won was slipping through her fingers like sand. Her team sat frozen, helpless to intervene. Jennifer bit her lip. Marcus rubbed his temple, and the silence stretched unbearably. And then from the corner of the room where he had been waiting quietly as protocol dictated, Daniel Carter rose. He had been instructed to remain outside, but he had been summoned to bring additional materials when the assistants faltered. He stood respectfully near the doorway, his posture humble but his presence steady. For a long moment he said nothing, simply observing. Then with a bow of perfect form he addressed the room. In flawless, fluid Japanese, "Honored Chairman Watanabe, distinguished members of the Sakura Board," he began, his tone respectful, his words chosen with cultural precision. "Permit me, as a humble observer, to clarify. What Ms. Bennett means is not to impose but to offer partnership. Her passion for growth may sound forceful, but it comes from a place of deep belief in mutual success. She wishes, as do all of us, for Sakura Technologies to thrive not under us but beside us." The effect was electric. The executives' eyes widened in surprise. Their stiff postures softened. Watanabe tilted his head, studying Daniel with newfound interest. The respectful cadence, the cultural understanding, the humility woven into his words, it was everything Claire's pitch had lacked. Claire sat frozen, stunned, her mind struggling to process the sight of her driver, addressing billion-dollar executives in their native tongue with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. The man she had mocked only days earlier for an anime hobby was now salvaging her collapsing empire before her eyes. And for the first time in years, Claire Bennett felt something she could not disguise with steel or polish. She felt fear. The hidden genius. For a few suspended seconds, the boardroom felt like a frozen photograph. The only sound was the low hum of the projector still displaying Claire's unfinished slides on the wall. Words about market dominance and inevitable expansion, glaring in contrast to the silence in the room. Every pair of eyes had turned to Daniel Carter, the man who had been standing unnoticed at the edge of the meeting, the man who until that moment had been nothing more than a driver in the eyes of the powerful and the arrogant. Chairman Watanabe, a man who rarely betrayed emotion, leaned forward slightly, his brows rising just enough to signal his surprise. The younger executives whispered softly among themselves in Japanese, their voices edged with curiosity rather than disapproval now. Daniel stood steady, his bow respectful, his gaze lowered just enough to show humility but lifted just enough to display confidence. Claire's throat felt dry. She wanted to snap at him, to demand he step back into the shadows where she believed he belonged. But the atmosphere in the room had shifted so abruptly that even she, in her arrogance, knew any attempt to silence him would be catastrophic. The Japanese executives were listening, truly listening in a way they had not done for her. Daniel continued, his words flowing with the kind of grace that comes not from memorized phrases but from lived understanding. "I beg your pardon for my interruption," he said in Japanese, each syllable measured, his tone polished with deep respect. "I only wish to clarify that Bennett Industries seeks not to change the spirit of Sakura Technologies, but to honor it. Ms. Bennett speaks with intensity because she believes in this partnership. Yet the essence of her vision is harmony, your strengths combined with ours, your traditions respected while new opportunities open together. It is not dominance she intends, but alliance. The shift was visible, shoulders that had been rigid relaxed. The faint frown smoothed into thoughtful expressions. A few board members nodded almost imperceptibly, acknowledging the way Daniel's phrasing had reframed what they had just heard. Claire sat utterly stunned, her usual arsenal of confidence suddenly useless. For the first time in her career, she was not the most commanding presence in the room. It was her driver. Chairman Watanabe turned to Daniel, his voice calm but carrying weight. "You speak our language with great skill," he said in Japanese. "Not only the words, but the heart." "Who are you, mister?" Daniel bowed again. "Carter, sir. Daniel Carter. I am but a staff member of Bennett Industries." Nothing more. But his humility only deepened their respect. The board members exchanged quiet comments, impressed not only by his fluency, but by the way he carried himself. To them, humility combined with knowledge was a rare and admirable quality. Claire's executives stared in disbelief. Marcus's mouth had fallen open. Jennifer's eyes were wide with recognition. She understood that what Daniel was doing was nothing short of saving them. Claire herself gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, torn between humiliation and the desperate realization that she needed him. The conversation flowed on, and Daniel handled it with elegance. When one of the executives raised a concern about whether Bennett Industries would understand Japanese customs in long-term partnerships, Daniel responded with a story about attending a tea ceremony during his studies, describing how he learned the value of silence, patience, and respect. He connected it directly to how a business partnership could honor traditions while embracing innovation. When another asked about the balance between profit and harmony, Daniel replied with a proverb, "The bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that resists," a phrase that carried deep resonance in Japanese culture. The boardroom warmed. Where Claire's numbers and force had built walls, Daniel's respect and understanding built bridges. As the dialogue continued, Claire could no longer deny what she was witnessing. Her driver, dismissed as nothing more than an employee whose name she barely remembered, was not only fluent in Japanese but possessed the kind of cultural intelligence that could shift the outcome of billion-dollar negotiations. Each sentence he spoke seemed to unravel the damage she had done, repairing threads she had ripped apart with her arrogance. At last, the meeting concluded. The executives stood, bowing politely, their eyes lingering on Daniel with unmistakable regard. Chairman Watanabe said, "We will consider the partnership with care. Your colleague has spoken with sincerity that honors us." Claire forced a smile, thanked them in English, and gathered her documents, but inside she felt shaken. As they left the boardroom, she walked stiffly, her heels echoing against the polished floor, her mind a storm of disbelief. The car ride back to the hotel was suffocating. Marcus and Jennifer exchanged silent glances in the back seat, choosing their words carefully. Claire sat rigid, staring out the window, her thoughts looping back again and again to the same truth. Daniel had saved her. And worse, he had done it in a way that made her appear small, unprepared, and foolish. Finally, she broke the silence. "Where the hell did you learn to speak like that?" she demanded, her voice low but edged with fury. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, his tone calm. "Languages have always been a passion of mine. I studied Japanese for years, lived in Kyoto for a time. I also speak Mandarin, Arabic, French, Russian, German, Spanish, Italian, and Swahili." The car went silent again. 9 languages. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Jennifer blinked, Marcus let out a low whistle, and even Claire, for all her arrogance, was momentarily speechless. Finally, she found her voice. 9 languages, she repeated, almost incredulous. "And you're a driver?" Daniel's answer was simple, but carried the weight of his character. "Driving allows me peace. It gives me time to read, to listen, to learn. Life is not always about climbing ladders. Sometimes it is about finding balance." His words stung her more than she wanted to admit. They were not spoken with arrogance, but with a quiet conviction that made her own endless hunger for power feel suddenly hollow. She said nothing more for the rest of the ride, but her thoughts churned. That night, long after her executives had retired and the Tokyo skyline shimmered outside her hotel window, Claire sat alone, her glass of wine untouched beside her. She replayed every moment of the boardroom, every phrase Daniel had spoken, every nod of approval from the Japanese executives. She could not escape the truth. Without him, the deal would have collapsed. And yet, she had mocked him, dismissed him, reduced him to nothing more than a chauffeur. For the first time in years, Claire Bennett felt the uncomfortable weight of humility pressing against her chest. And it terrified her. But she also knew something else, though she could not bring herself to admit it out loud. The deal was not yet secure. Sakura Technologies had not signed anything. The next round of discussions would decide everything. And now, whether she liked it or not, she needed Daniel Carter. $1 billion saved, a lesson learned. The next morning broke over Tokyo in soft gold light. But for Claire Bennett, it felt heavy, like a battlefield shrouded in fog. She stood at the window of her suite, staring at the sprawling city below, her reflection in the glass sharper than the towers on the horizon. Her nerves prickled beneath her skin. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar gnawing at her confidence, uncertainty. The deal that should have been the crowning achievement of her career had nearly slipped through her fingers. And the man who had salvaged it was not her CFO, not her seasoned executives, not her carefully rehearsed strategy, but her driver. She dressed in silence, each button of her blazer fastening like armor before battle. Yet even the weight of that armor could not hide the truth clawing at her. She was not in full control. Claire hated that thought more than she hated weakness itself. Control had been her mantra, her weapon, the blade she wielded to cut through competitors and doubters. But now, stepping into the second day of negotiations, she knew the balance of power had shifted. In the car, the atmosphere was taut. Marcus Green flipped through his notes, his jaw set. Jennifer Walsh typed on her tablet, stealing glances at Daniel in the driver's seat. Even the junior executives sensed the undercurrent. Today would decide everything. And at the center of it all was Daniel, calm and steady, as if he carried none of the weight pressing down on everyone else. His hands rested lightly on the wheel, his posture relaxed, his eyes alert. He looked, Claire realized, with a stab of irritation and awe, not like a servant driving his employer, but like a man guiding a ship through stormy waters. The convoy pulled up to Sakura Technologies headquarters once again, the building gleaming in the morning light. Claire's heels echoed sharply against the stone floors as she entered, her executives trailing behind. But this time, the room she walked into no longer felt like her arena. It was neutral ground, and she knew it. The boardroom was exactly as it had been the day before. Long oak table polished to a sheen, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Tokyo skyline, and the Sakura executives seated in calm composure. Chairman Watanabe sat at the center, his face unreadable, his silver hair catching the light. Claire began the session with her most measured smile, careful not to repeat yesterday's mistakes. But even as she spoke, she felt the stiffness in the air, the sense that her words alone would not be enough to mend what had been fractured. And then, almost seamlessly, Daniel stepped forward again. It was not planned, not scripted, but it felt inevitable. He bowed low before the board, his respect evident, his presence humble yet commanding. When he spoke, the language flowed like water, each phrase chosen with care, each word striking the delicate balance between humility and strength. He reframed Claire's proposals into terms of shared growth, mutual honor, and respect for tradition. He wove in proverbs and metaphors that resonated deeply with the culture of those before him. Where Claire's tone had been steel, Daniel's was silk, yet stronger for its gentleness. The board leaned in. Their expressions, once guarded, softened into true engagement. Watanabe himself nodded thoughtfully, his gaze lingering on Daniel with clear admiration. Questions came quickly in Japanese, some technical, some philosophical. Daniel fielded each one with calm precision, translating not only language but intent, ensuring that Claire's vision came across not as domination, but as collaboration. He did not overshadow her. Instead, he elevated her, placing her strategy within a framework the Japanese executives could respect. Claire sat in silence, watching the impossible unfold. The very deal she had been about to lose was being rebuilt before her eyes by a man she had dismissed as background. It was like watching a master pianist play on an instrument she had thought broken. Daniel was not forcing the notes. He was coaxing harmony from discord. And slowly, one by one, the Sakura executives began to nod, their pens moving across papers, their voices lifting in agreement. The final moment came when Chairman Watanabe leaned forward, his hands clasped. He spoke in Japanese, his voice deliberate. Daniel listened, then translated, his tone reverent. Chairman Watanabe says Sakura Technologies will move forward with this partnership, not because of promises of profit, but because he believes this alliance has been presented with respect, humility, and sincerity. He thanks Ms. Bennett for her vision, and he thanks Bennett Industries for sending someone who speaks not only to their minds, but to their hearts. The words landed like thunder. A deal worth over $1 billion, saved. Claire should have felt triumphant, her usual rush of victory pulsing through her veins. But instead she felt humbled, stripped of her illusions of invincibility. The applause that followed from her own executives rang hollow in her ears because she knew the truth. This was not her triumph. It was Daniel's that evening. A signing ceremony was held. Flashbulbs popped as documents were inked, handshakes exchanged, and photographers captured the moment for the business press. Claire stood at the center, smiling for the cameras, but her eyes kept drifting to the man standing just out of frame, the driver who had become the savior of her empire. He did not bask in the attention, did not claim the spotlight, did not boast. He stood quietly, as if content to fade back into the shadows, as if the applause was unnecessary for a man who carried his victories within. Back at the hotel, Claire gathered her executives for a private debrief. Marcus, for once, could not resist speaking plainly. "Claire, let's not pretend. We all know what happened in that room. Daniel saved this deal." Jennifer nodded firmly. "If it weren't for him, Sakura Technologies would have walked away. He earned their trust in a way none of us could." Claire bristled, pride flaring like an old instinct. But then she looked at Daniel, who sat quietly near the door, not demanding credit, not seeking praise. And for the first time in her career, she felt the sharp sting of humility pierce her armor. She took a deep breath, then turned to him. "Daniel," she said slowly, her voice quieter than her team had ever heard, "I owe you an apology. I dismissed you. I mocked you. And I was wrong. You didn't just save a deal. You taught me something I should have learned long ago. That power isn't about crushing others. It's about listening, about respecting, about seeing the people around you for who they really are." The room was silent. Her executives stared astonished as Claire Bennett, the woman who never admitted fault, spoke words of contrition. Daniel inclined his head, his expression calm. "Thank you, ma'am, but there's no need for apology. Respect is shown in actions more than words. What matters is what you choose to do next." His words struck her harder than any criticism could have. She nodded slowly, realizing that he was right. In the weeks that followed, the deal was celebrated across the business world. Headlines called it a landmark partnership, a triumph of global collaboration. Bennett Industries' stock soared, and Claire Bennett was hailed as a visionary once again. But inside her, something had shifted. She began to treat her team differently, listening where once she commanded, considering perspectives where once she dismissed. It was not an overnight transformation. Old habits die hard. But the seed had been planted and it grew. As for Daniel Carter, he remained Daniel Carter. Offers came, consultancy roles, diplomatic assignments, lucrative contracts, but he declined them all with quiet grace. Driving, he said, gave him space to think, to read, to observe. He did not need titles to know his worth. One afternoon, months later, as Claire sat in the back of the car, she asked him, "Why do you stay? You could be anything, a diplomat, an executive, a professor. Why choose this?" Daniel glanced at her in the mirror, his eyes calm, his voice steady. "Because life isn't about being seen, Ms. Bennett, it's about seeing. And sometimes the ones everyone overlooks are the ones who understand the most." Claire looked out the window, the city lights blurring past, her reflection faint against the glass. For the first time, she did not see herself as untouchable, unbreakable, or all-powerful. She saw herself as human, flawed, learning, and perhaps finally growing. And she knew with absolute certainty that the man she had once dismissed as nothing more than a driver was the wisest teacher she had ever had.